So what's been on your mind as a narrative designer?
Well, recently we've just started, probably for the last maybe 2 or 3 months, we've started doing prototyping for new games. So we've recently released a couple of games, one this year, one last year, and they were quite strong in a sort of a setting and like overall idea perspective, but there wasn't much in terms of story as a part of the original or initial design, like thematically. So we, as a result, when we started, getting towards the end and we started talking about, we need a campaign and we need a narrative to go along with it, we really didn't know what the point of the story would be. So as a result, like, it did sort of feel a bit tacked on. And even though the game's really fun, it is a fun game where the focus was on gameplay rather than story. But a lot of the people who work here do actually really love story-driven games. So a lot of us kind of got restless. And so some of the prototypes that are coming out are more focused on things like character and setting and interesting ideas, and that are more focused on fun storylines, enjoyable storylines to go along with. So when I was thinking of what I could do, I didn't really have an interesting storyline, but I had this idea that I've been thinking about and trying to explore very quietly in like Twine things for a few years now. And what it stemmed from was playing a number of narrative-driven games that are very narrative and dialogue focused. So lots of choice points of choosing between different types of dialogue, different lines. But I'd find that almost in every one of these games, there would be one point at least where I would be playing the game, think, yeah, that's exactly what I want to say. And that sounds like and I want to do this. And yeah, okay, that'll be a great choice. And I'll choose the dialogue. And the actor will say a different line and it will have a different intention. And then one of the NPCs will get really offended or get really confused. And I'll get a warning that like this will have consequences. And it really breaks the immersion. And so what I kind of started feeling like was, it wasn't that I was really playing the game anymore. It was more like I was sort of trying to direct the character, or like script edit, more than actually direct or play this character and what they wanted to say. Because even though I said, yes, this one, that choice would kind of almost be taken away from me, because it was, dramatically more interesting. And, I can completely understand it from a development perspective. But for me as the player, that would really break my immersion. I loved how in Life is Strange, I could go back and change if the dialogue didn't pan out the way I was hoping that it would. And that wasn't necessarily to do with, like, it was part and part to do with the reactions of the NPCs not going the way I wanted, but it was also to do with the character not saying the line the way that I wanted. So I started kind of thinking about that and thinking about my experience as an actor. And I know you've got a background in theatre as well. And one of the things that actors are encouraged to do, and I think this comes from Stanislavski originally. So Stanislavski being like the director that was kind of the father of, he had the system of acting and his acting system. And then that got brought to America and became the method acting, which a lot of Hollywood actors use today. And so it's a very well-known term. So Stanislavski, one of the things he talked about was giving, not trying to mechanically remember all of your movements and doing this, but to more think about an idea that would lead to an action, something that you could act upon. So something like an intention. So this gets called, I don't think this was his term, but it gets called like an action verb. So I've seen a number of actors kind of break down. It's like, what is my intention for every line? What does this line mean? What am I trying to do here? Why would I say this word? Because for a lot of actors, when they're working in plays, all of the dialogue is pre-written. There's no option to select, do I say this to this person or do I say that to that person? But they do have the option of, how do I say it? What am I trying to do? How can I impact them. And then the other actor will also have intentions, and, you know, and if that clashes, then you can get interesting actions and reactions out of it. So I was thinking about that, and I was like, well, what if we started assigning action verbs to the lines of dialogue? So what if, you know, what if we talked about, you know, the first line of dialogue with the intent to insult or to undermine or to flatter or to escape? And I was talking about this with my fiance, who is not an actor, and he was like, oh, I can't remember the name. Tex Murphy. Tex Murphy does that. And so I said, okay, show me. But it had like in parentheses what the tone of it was. And I was like, that's close. That's almost there. But I'm still choosing between, you know, ultimately just different lines of dialogue, different. There's no choice to really get across what I want to say. So I was thinking about the verbs, and I was thinking that about the term action verbs. And I know in gameplay design as well, there's the term of like breaking down your verbs of what does the character actually do? What does the player do? Can they jump? Can they run? Can they, you know, climb ladders? Can they slash their sword? Can they do, you know, all of these different things, different abilities, effects, things like that? And I thought, well, that's interesting that there's this common term of verb to what you can do in a game and how you can say something or what you can be trying to do on stage. And I was
nice.
reading
that's nice. Anything that overlaps them.
Weird, yeah. And I was looking at Chris Crawford's book on game design, and I was looking back over his discussion about verbs, and he has this interesting thing where he says, like, you don't choose door 1 or you choose door 2 or you choose door 3. That's not 3 separate choices. It's really one choice, unless you're choosing to walk through door 1 and knock on door 2 and I don't know, teleport past door 3 or something like that. Those actions, those verbs are the different choices. So I was thinking about that in terms of a lot of these dialogue games, and I thought, well, most of them don't give much verb choice. They don't actually give me that much agency of what can I do in this conversation. It's more about which line of dialogue will I choose from. I'm going to say all of them. So that's really my verb. I'm saying all of them. I'm not, you know, again, I'm not insulting. I'm not undermining. I'm not flattering. I'm not joking. Or to make someone laugh. That's not my intention. I'm trying to read into that as a player, try and read into how that line might be intended to be said by the writer, and then that even may not be what ends up being said by the actor, because the actor may bring something else, and then, oh great, and then we'll do a rewrite, and then which is a great organic process, but it can then, I can see exactly how it would lead to rush, and then not being able to edit back, and then doing things like that. So I was thinking about, where have I seen games where they've allowed that? And Life is Strange is one of them, where you can say things, but then you can also choose to rewind. You can choose to, and one of the only ways I see, like, there are choices. It's like you can choose to say something or say nothing. So like, be silent or say something, and that's kind of the only choice you get. The only other game that I could really think of, and jump in if you can think of anything, is the Phoenix Wright games, where there's not too much dialogue choice, especially in the court cases, but you can choose to, say, I think it's like hold it, and you can interrogate them more, or you can go and get information. It sort of reminds me of another theatre improv game that I remember playing like in high school, which was to, I think you could say stop to someone, like say they'd be telling a story and you'd say stop to them, tell me more, and then they'd keep talking on the same point, and then you say stop, continue, and so then they'd have to jump back to their story and keep going that way. So I was thinking about it. I was thinking, well, if we, how would I integrate something like that into into the games that we're working on, into something that I would want to work with. And I tried to make a twine game where I sort of gave options and then would kind of, you know, essentially be branching. You can say this or say that, and then you can say it in this way or in that way. And then the reactions would be written quite differently. And I thought, well, that just ends up feeling like writerly waste. Like it's interesting as a writer, but it's not concise. So I was thinking about it, and, you know, as I said, I use twine, and I've been playing a bit with ink as well, and thinking about how to communicate non-verbally, or, you know, verbally if it's just written in something like twine. How can you express without changing the lines? You know, going back to that idea of, in a script, you don't really get to change the lines on the fly unless you've forgotten your lines, and then everyone gets frustrated at you. Or it is a play where there's a lot of improvisation allowed. But in order to have the same lines, so the actual dialogue itself is the same, but you can kind of cheat with those in-between things, those non-verbal, you know, aspects of communication. You know, that whole thing of like 93% of conversation is you know, non-verbal.
And the more that you reduce you know, what you'll put into the game as a creator, you know, removing the text and all that sort of stuff, the more the player projects themselves into it. You know? Exactly.
Yeah.
They put all their own thoughts and basically these small words or these actions actually mean this, and no one else has to know that it actually means those things, but for the player, they're completely invested in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the nice thing as well that I always like about acting, and I thought was interesting about this as well, is that, you know, like you and I, if we're actors playing off each other, and I say my line and my intention is to wound you, well, your situation in the story and your intention for your next line may cause you to just completely ignore the fact that I've been quite hurtful to you, or I may be trying to just be like comforting, but you may overreact. So my intention is not like, it's not like I win at everything. It's not like, you know, I play this and it's like, oh, well, now guaranteed you're going to hurt them. It's not as simple as that. So it's still got that element of it not having to be absolutely going the way that like the player or the actor would want. There's still that element of play and curiosity and uncertainty.
That's nice. So it's as you said, like playing with intention. So yes, you have the ability to express your intention, but your intention is not necessarily going to play out, just like real life. It's not going to necessarily play out, or people won't necessarily respond in the way that you intend. Yeah, and there's a number of reasons that could happen, and so then you start playing into, you know, a lot of people talk about sort of systems design as well, of you know, tracking stats of how many times you've been nice to someone and how many times you've been, you know, not so nice to someone, or, you know, or upset at a third party. And I was looking a lot as well at, again, Chris Crawford, and he's got this talk online. I probably should have written down the name of it, but it's called like Lecture 3 or something really non-specific like that. And he's talking about rather than tracking your attributes, you're kind of more tracking the other character's perception of you and perception of each other's. So they're looking at, you know, how trustworthy you are, how likable you are, things like that. And those things can all feed into the responses that, you know, the other characters can give you. Yes.
But rather
we'll include a link to the video in the Twitter.
Yeah, I'll find it, and it's really good. It's really interesting. I love rewatching it. There's a lot in there, but yeah, because it is about sort of looking at their perception of you, but combining that with the idea that the dialogue doesn't need to change, just the way that the dialogue is played can be changed. Then you can start playing around with, how do these different things that they think about you interact to help them choose to, or, you know, help the game choose how they would deliver the lines. It doesn't have to be perfect, because people aren't perfect. It's, you know, it's not cinematic. It's not predetermined and it's playing. It's that element of play that I think a lot of actors really love, and that's why they go into acting. It's, playing pretend, playing with another person of what is it to have these different emotions and have these different characters. So I think there's a lot of ways in which the systems and the gameplay design can relate and reflect on that without it necessarily having to be like a bar graph at the top or anything like that. It's not about how do you display this to the player in like a really tangible, obvious way. It's more, how can we use that information to respond and react to what you do? And as I said, sometimes there can totally, speaking to gameplay designers, there can be totally a situation where it's like, we don't know how this character would handle that. Because, we've all been in that conversation where someone says something to you and you're like, well,
I don't have a prepared script for that.
I have no words for this. I will say something because it's the right thing to say. And then you walk away later and you're just like, that was weird. That's a normal human, reaction.
So you can have a shock, you can have a shock loop.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm really interested in doing is exploring the ways, and I'm sure there are so many different ways of doing it, but exploring the ways that, you can look at verbs and what you want to do and what the player will want to do. And you can look at that thematically as well and sort of think about what does the character want to do, or what does the character need to do? Because this isn't about removing and erasing the character's character. As an actor, you're still playing a character, so you've still got essentially a limited number of things that you would do as that character. So it's not about having like the longest verb list in the book. It's not about,
it's about role play.
Yeah. And it's about, essentially the writers of like the game designers and the narrative designers. And I kind of, because I get into this little thing of getting really excited about matching words, like the verbs thing, like I got really excited about like, hang on a minute, game players, theatre players, like we're both players, it's like actors and players. Like I just get really excited about that. So then I started thinking about, I always love the term playwright, WRIGHT, not writing, but like building, writing. So now I think of it as like gameplay rights, and I really enjoy that for some weird reason. But how can you create the characters and what the characters would do in a game? It's just like a gameplay designer would say, well, they can or they can't jump. I go into like, I was playing The Witcher 1, I think recently, just, I was just playing around in it. And I got really frustrated that I couldn't jump because I'm used to games where it looks like that and I can jump. So I was like, why can't I jump? Why can't I press space and jump? But that was a design decision. And, there's lots of repercussions for making those design decisions about what verbs to include in your game. What can I do as a player when I'm playing the game? And I think the same is true of character. And all of that really comes from theme. What is the feeling of the game, the idea? What fits a cohesive whole for this world, for this character, for the characters around them? With giving the example of Life is Strange, that ability to rewind is part of the general gameplay as well as the sort of the narrative play. And in Phoenix Wright, as I said, there's that element of not necessarily needing to choose your dialogue options, because it's not really important whether you choose to say something or not. It's when you choose to say and what action you're doing, whether you're getting more information or whether you're saying, wait, look at this contradicts you.
Yeah, and this is where drawing on, I find when I'm designing, when I'm doing narrative design, and it's about a situation that I've been through before. Obviously we've got to draw it ourselves, otherwise, we're just making stuff up. But like, it's always grounded there, and it's a case of, okay, what I always write down like, what are all the different things I've thought and I felt, and because it's a whole range. If you when you go through things, there's no I was just this, I was just confident, or I was just scared. So no, I was afraid at that point. I was grieving at that point. I was angry at that point. Whatever it is, and so so you can plan out, what you're saying, like all of those possible actions that are, based on what would fit for what you're trying to design in that moment. Yeah.
Exactly. And likewise, we've all been in those moments where we've done or said something and walked away and gone, oh, I really wish like I'd told them how I really felt, or like, I wish I hadn't been so nice. I wish I hadn't let them get away with it. I wish I'd, or, if they say this, then I'm totally going to, just tell them to shut up and I don't care. And but then the moment comes and you're like, oh no, I'll just smooth this over. I won't anger them. I won't try to insult them. I won't do all of it. These are different, more aggressive verbs. I won't do that. Instead, I will placate them. I will make them smile. I will do all of these different things to have a positive outcome rather than the what I'd really like to do. And so to me, those choices are more interesting.
And it grounds the player then with what they're feeling and thinking at the same time, except rather than projecting into what should I do to get what I need to happen in the game. Brings it back to their embodied experience. So what do you have for us as a activity, as
an activity?
Yeah,
it's kind of on like what I was saying, like talking about theme and thinking about thinking about your characters. And so I actually did this recently on the game that I'm exploring in prototyping. So I was thinking about, well, what's really the theme of the overall narrative of the world? What's the point that I want to make? The characters that I'm exploring. I wrote down basically a paragraph or two of what they're trying to do. So that's what I would recommend. Sit down, write about your game, write about, doesn't have to be game. It can be, whatever you're working on, your story, your world, your project, whatever you're working on. Write about what your character's hopes and goals are. And remember that your character could be the setting, your character could be a group of people, like your character could be anything like that. Just talk about the hopes, dreams, goals, desires, abilities, like what can't they do, what can they do, what might they do, what would they never do, things like that. Just write down all of those things and keep writing it over and over and just go as long as you can. And then when you're finished, stop and start underlining all the verbs. So when I did that, I started picking up verbs. Some were negative, some were positive, and I started thinking about them in terms of, for the story arc or for the game's arc, what do they need to start doing? What do they need to stop doing? Both of those are things that they can do. You can also think about them on a continuum. If you have things like, I don't think I wrote anything down, but it's like, say you have someone that's always picking fights and it always gets them into trouble. Now, one thing that they can always do is they can always insult, or they can always wield power. But maybe what they actually need to do is to try to be soft. So you could try and put that like on a continuum and see
your transformation line.
Yeah, it's a transformation line with two extremes. One of the things I really loved when I was researching Aristotelian tragedy, and there's this idea, Aristotle's idea of like vice versus virtue. And it's not like, kind of, we have this thing of like, this is good behavior, this is bad behavior, this is virtue, this is vice. For him, it was more like, these are two extremes. This is extreme cowardliness, and this is the person that never gives up on a fight. Both of these are vices. They're unbalanced. In the middle is courage. It's knowing when to pursue a fight, knowing when to retreat. What's best. So that would be kind of the virtue, exploring the virtue of courage, and you could play with characters that would fall on either side. So likewise, you might find that you've got a lot of words that kind of pick up, a lot of verbs that talk about the same sort of continuum. And then it's nice to group those together and say, well, those are the things that they can do.
That's great. Thank you.
So what, and then I've got one more step with that. So what
Go for it.
it's very short, is then to think about that not just in terms of the actual narrative design of the game, not just think about it in terms of the intentions of the player, but also the gameplay side of what they can do in the world. Game that I think does this nicely was the Leighton Brothers like mystery box or something like that, or mystery room, and it was clearly like an investigation murder mystery game. So it's all about investigation. That's a key point. So for investigation, that's something that can come up in dialogue. You could, keep pressing someone to get more information out of them. That's investigative discussion. And in the game, you can go and explore and investigate. So using those words, both, considering gameplay and action verbs as one, just, launch point. That's